terminer la guerre.
A leading radical, Jerry Rubin.
The only way the war is going to end it is if we have war in the streets. And when people see there's going to be war in the streets of America, then they're going to stop dropping bombs on Vietnam 10,000 miles away to stop the war at home.
But the war again escalates. November 67. Johnson orders bombing to within 5 miles of Hanoi. Johnson denies press reports that the war in the South is going badly. This creates a so-called credibility gap. Johnson tries to close it.
I've had 3 meetings with Ambassador Bunker and 3 with General Westmoreland. Our American people like when we get in a contest of any kind, whether it's in a war or an election or in a football game or what it is, they want it decided and decided quickly and get in or get out, and they like for that curve to rise like this, and they like for the opposition to go down like this.
But Johnson's inner circle is split. His defense secretary, Robert McNamara, once viewed as the architect of technological war, is now described as racked with doubt. He is eased from office.
Mr. President, I cannot find words to express what lies in my heart today. And I think I'd better respond on another occasion.
North Vietnam's defense minister, Bo Nguyen Giap, is confident. He is planning a bold offensive that will shatter American hopes for winning the war. One target is the Marine base at Khe Sanh, a place in many ways like Dien Bien Phu, the scene of Giap's victory over the French 14 years earlier. January 20th, 1968. A 77-day siege begins. Then, early in the siege, General Giap launches his main plan, the Tet Offensive, timed to the Vietnamese New Year. In a spectacular raid, the guerrillas occupy the American embassy grounds in the heart of Saigon. Within hours, they are overcome, but the shock they leave is permanent. 100 cities and towns are assaulted by 80,000 guerrillas. American troops must now fight in the cities. Television flashes home the images of pain and doubt.
Awful sick of it. I'll be so glad to go home. I don't know. It's the worst area we've been in since I've been in Vietnam.
Do you think it's worth it?
Yeah, I don't know. They say we're fighting for something. I don't know.
The violence jolts America. A Viet Cong suspect is executed in cold blood. Each night on the evening news, Americans watch the casualty toll mount. Vietnam is the first war fought without news censorship. Secretary of State Dean Rusk.
This was the first struggle fought on television in everybody's living room every day. What would have happened in World War II if Guadalcanal and the Anzio beachhead and the Battle of the Bulge or the Dieppe raid were on television and the other side was not doing the same thing?
Hold us right here, please. Hold us right here.
Whether ordinary people can sustain a war effort under that kind of daily hammering is a very large question.
Despite these military successes, criticism in America intensifies.
Very profoundly. This was the turning point of the war. It could have been a turning point for success, but it was the turning point for failure.
As Tet ends, America gets a new defense secretary. Before Tet, Clark Clifford had been a supporter of the war. Johnson has commissioned him to investigate military options in Vietnam.
I finally asked the ultimate question, and that is, what is the plan for the United States to win the war? It was startling to me to find out that we had no military plan to win the war. At the end of this rather lengthy inquiry that took 3 weeks or a month, I then reported my personal views to President Johnson, and I said it was very clear to me that the one course of action that the United States should take is to get out of Vietnam. It was a real loser.
The president agrees. He announces a bombing halt and the intention to seek peace. And he acknowledges that Vietnam has destroyed his presidency. He will not seek re-election. 1969, President Richard Nixon pledges to obtain peace.
The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker. This honor now beckons America, the chance to help lead the world at last out of the valley of turmoil and onto that high ground of peace that man has dreamed of since the dawn of civilization.
What do we want? Peace! When do we want it? Now! You want it? Talk up! What do we want?
Protest escalates, but the majority rally behind Nixon's stated objective of peace with honor. Defense Secretary Melvin Ladd.
But the day I entered the Pentagon, I stated I'd be there for one day longer than 4 years, and no more. And that my objectives were to withdraw American forces from Vietnam in an honorable fashion. I made the decision, and I recommended to the Congress and to the President that we Vietnamize the war, we de-Americanize the war, that we get Americans out of Vietnam.
The new U.S. administration sells the idea to South Vietnam's president, Nguyen Van Thieu.
I think that the Vietnamization, if it's honestly done, it's fully done, it's a continuous one, it could be a way to prevent the collapse of South Vietnam.
South Vietnam begins general mobilization. September '69. North Vietnam mourns its revolutionary leader, Ho Chi Minh. Ho leaves behind a people disciplined to war and a leadership united behind his goal, one Vietnam. The North has now been at war for 24 years. Prime Minister Pham Van Dong is asked what motivates the North. Journalist Wilfred Burchett.
Why are you like you are? Why are the Vietnamese like they are? What's in you? What makes you tick? And he laughed and said, well, you know, what is our history? There's nothing else in our history except struggle. Struggle against foreign invaders, struggle against nature. And this, the result of this after 2,000 odd years, he said, is that we never panic. And whatever new situation arises, our people say, oh, well, there it goes again. But he repeated this 3 times. There's nothing else in our history except struggle.
We're also talking about a society that is enormously disciplined. A society that historically was well disciplined. And during the course of the war, every aspect of that society was geared toward fighting the war. I mean, we're not talking about a society with a free press. We're not talking about a society with open debate. We're talking about a society where the production, the economy, every newspaper, virtually every poem, artistic activity was all geared toward that war effort.
North Vietnam's war machine is supported by massive aid from the socialist bloc. By 1970, communist military aid totals $4 billion. The North now slows the war in the South as U.S. troops begin to withdraw. But Hanoi builds up supply sanctuaries in neighboring Cambodia. These border sanctuaries are seen as jeopardizing the Vietnamization policy. Nixon tries secret bombing of these areas. Then, in a major escalation of the war, Nixon orders a joint American-Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. The invasion force pushes 20 miles across the border, but the communists slip away. Supplies are found, but the 2-month operation is a military disappointment. From the start of the invasion, the protest in America is bitter and bloody. Kent State University, Ohio. National Guardsmen fire into a crowd of student demonstrators, killing 4. In 1971, former State Department official Daniel Ellsberg releases the Pentagon Papers, a secret and critical analysis of the war.
I had the feeling that America was eating its young, was destroying some of its most dedicated, most patriotic, most concerned citizens, young Americans subject to the draft. And that it was up to older people like me, who had been participants, not to let that burden fall entirely on their children and on that generation.
Nixon rejects the protest, saying his policy is to get concessions. Domestic advisor John Ehrlichman.
Well, his position was that he'd been elected as the individual under the constitutional system responsible for the conduct of foreign policy and the waging of war, if you please. And that foreign policy just couldn't be made in the streets.
Ray Conniff and his very famous choral group will now entertain us. And if the music is square, it's because I like it square.
But protest closes in, even at the White House.
President Nixon, stop bombing human beings, animals, and vegetation. You go to church on Sundays and pray to Jesus Christ. If Jesus Christ were here tonight, you would not dare drop another bomb. Bless the Berrigans and bless Daniel Ellsberg.
We will return to Vietnam, the 10,000-day war, on the Discovery Channel.
To begin secret peace talks with the North Vietnamese. America makes a major concession. Communist troops can stay in the South, but Hanoi still insists on the removal of President Thieu. Nixon retaliates.
Bear in mind that Henry and Nixon played good guy, bad guy in these negotiations, just like a couple of cops. Henry would go to the negotiations and say, and I have this from Nixon, I know this, it was their strategy. He would say to the North Vietnamese, look, I represent this crazy fellow Nixon over there. There's no telling what he might do. I am a very reasonable man. I am a man of peace. I oppose these bombings and so on, but there's no telling what Nixon might do. So you'd better make your deal with me because I'm going to be easier to get along with than he is. And then if he got to a sticking point, he would report back and they would unleash the bombers or some kind of an offensive or something so that Henry could go back and say, see what happens when you don't make your deal with me? Then he back there in the White House does something crazy.
Okay, radios.
When the North refuses to back down, Nixon orders heavy bombing by giant B-52s. 1972 brings massive escalation. North Vietnam invades across the border. Only round-the-clock bombing turns back the ground offensive.
Setting be 090 in 1 minute.
Understand, 090.
Roger, Paul. This 3 is coming out pretty good. Roger.
Hanoi is now the new front as Nixon orders the B-52s closer and closer to the capital. The city is ringed with Soviet anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles.
Turning 090. Lead has been skilled there.
Roger.
The bombing reaches the industrial suburbs. Hanoi reports heavy civilian casualties.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Stand by to release. Ready now. Bombs going.
Nixon sustains the bombing, ignoring world criticism. Nixon is anxious to force a peace agreement before the November presidential election.
Let's get post-bomb release.
In October, Hanoi settles. Its troops will remain in the south, and President Thieu will remain in power. Nixon sees the terms as honorable. A week before the election, Kissinger announces peace is at hand. Nixon is re-elected by the greatest number of popular votes in American history. There is one major snag. Kissinger has failed to convince Thieu to go along. On a hurried visit to Saigon, he tells Thieu to accept or face a cutoff in aid. Chu says he cannot accept the North's troops in the South.
I'm not a yes man. I am not a puppet. I am not agree with everything the American would like to impose to our people.
Hanoi now stalls as well. Nixon responds with maximum force. The B-52 strikes central Hanoi for the first time. The bombing lasts for 11 days over Christmas 1972. Hanoi is now willing to sign the peace treaty.
The ceasefire will take effect at 2400 Greenwich Mean Time, January 27, 1973. The United States and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam express the hope that this agreement will ensure stable peace in Vietnam and contribute to the preservation of lasting peace in Indochina and Southeast Asia.
Even as the agreement is signed, fighting continues. Chu calls the agreement an American betrayal and predicts full-scale war. North Vietnam's peace negotiators are welcomed home as victors. Hanoi has repeated the strategy of prolonged war which tired the French 19 years earlier. America's last soldiers leave. Under the treaty, a mere 50 U.S. military advisors remain from a one-time force of over 500,000. Nixon and Chu meet one last time. Nixon secretly pledges full U.S. retaliation if South Vietnam's existence is threatened. But Nixon himself is swept from office by the Watergate scandal. The U.S. Congress begins to cut back aid to Saigon. South Vietnam is alone. In December 1974, the communist leadership decides on a 2-year program for military victory. They assume that American bombers will not return, that the American people are tired of Vietnam. Defense Minister Giap.
Even now, if they deploy their Air Force and Navy, they will fail again. The Vietnamese people do not fear such things. It is obvious that our people, particularly our countrymen and soldiers fighting in the South, have beaten the American imperialists.
Under intense pressure, Chu resigns. He hurries into exile, bearing a lasting bitterness toward the United States.
They have abandoned. They have sold out us. They have a stab on their back, on our back. It's true. It's clear. They have betrayed.
As communist forces advance to certain victory, President Ford declares the war is over.
Today, America can regain the sense of pride that existed before Vietnam. But it cannot be achieved by refighting a war that is finished as far as America is concerned.
America's message that its Vietnam involvement is finally ended brings panic in Saigon. The early objective of safeguarding democracy in South Vietnam is reduced to the hurried evacuation of a favored few. As the Vietnam conflict ends, the majority of Americans express only relief that it is finally over. For the North Vietnamese, it has taken 30 years. Diplomat Ha Van Lao.
There were a lot of emotions at that moment. Everyone could breathe again. The war was over. Peace was established. And above all, we became the true masters of our own country, our own land, independent. Our first thoughts were of our president, Ho Chi Minh, who was not there to see with his own eyes the most glorious moment in our history.
Saigon's presidential palace, noon, April 30th, 1975. The end comes after 10,000 days.
Tomorrow.